Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. I'm Ara Guzelimian, and it's a great pleasure to be with this assembled think tank representing a quite wonderful diversity of musical and creative opinions for us to explore the various streams and the various sources of creativity that are beginning to inform orchestras in new and unexpected ways, and for us to contemplate some of the specific actions that actually help engineer and help drive the engine of change within American orchestras. And so let me quickly introduce the panel, and I'll begin by asking each of the panelists a little bit about a project or an initiative or a perspective that will help set the stage. And then our very fond hope is that rather than us talking at you, we have a very lively conversation back and forth as a room. And as you can see, there are two microphones in the center of the room. So fairly early on after the initial presentations, we would encourage you to plunge in, and I'll prompt you as well. Beginning at my right-hand side, our panel is Demarre McGill, who is currently the principal flutist of the San Diego Symphony and soon to move straight up the West Coast to become principal flutist of the Seattle Symphony. Demarre is the innovator and the artistic force behind a very successful and unorthodox chamber music series in San Diego called Art of Élan, sorry, not Music of Élan, but Art of Élan, E-L-A-N, which has unexpectedly had very positive ramifications for the orchestra's life as well, even though it's independent of the orchestra. Next to him is Stanley Romanstein, the president of the Atlanta Symphony, which has always had a rather forward-looking profile. And as you might expect, there are some new ventures that are yet to come that expand that profile in unexpected ways. Next to Stanley is Limor Tomer, who just this month, right, began as the manager of programs and lectures for the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. Limor and I have worked together in various capacities. She's been a performance curator at the Whitney Museum in New York, and has also had a very important set of experiences that I think are particularly relevant as well for orchestral thinking and planning, which is as a music producer for WNYC and WQXR, now public radio for classical music in New York City. And there are always interesting intersections between the ideas that inform programming for radio and public radio and programming for orchestras as well. Jesse Rosen hardly needs any introduction, but it's awfully nice to have Jesse as a thinker and a participant on the panel. And I will remind all of us that Jesse's orchestral experience includes a very important and innovative tenure at the head of the American Composers Orchestra. So he's in his capacity here as one of us rather than fearless leader on this panel. And next to him is Howard Herring, the executive director of the New World Symphony, which just blazed the field with an extraordinary new facility that opened earlier this year. And again, New World Symphony has seemingly annually helped reinvent thinking for orchestras. And maybe we'll save Jesse for last in this round of conversations, and I'll just begin by going down the line. Why don't we each take 3 or 4 minutes? And Howard, why don't you talk about how the conception of the New World Center has already in, 6 months of being begun to change how the New World Symphony goes about what it does?
Sure, thank you. Thank you, Ara. New World Symphony is a fellowship program. Our players come to us on 3-year fellowships. They come from all over the world. We're about 1,100 people, 1,100 young players for the 30 openings in each orchestra. They come to us on this fellowship between their education and their professional lives, and so we have this incredible pool of talented young players, also thoughtful individuals. And so when we began thinking, this is now 5, 6, 7 years ago, about what we wanted to be in 2030 and 2040, we said, how will we make an educational experience for them that will be about their future, and how can we make this facility be so open-ended, so flexible, so available to their imaginations that it will indeed stimulate them to prepare. So we did build a flexible space, and it has, within the performance hall itself, a dozen projectors, a dozen 30,000 lumen high-definition projectors. It has microphones. It has 10 fixed camera positions. We're able to capture everything that happens there. And then we're able to bring that, both sight and sound, into a public park, actually hitting the wall of our primary facade, and what we call wall casting to the public for free. So the flexibility of the hall and the flexibility of the facade of the building give us a chance to think about what we just simply call new performance formats. And I'll give them to you very quickly. We'll probably circle back to this later. We do 30-minute performances for $2.50. The idea is to, and we offer them at 7:30, 8:30, and 9:30 over the course of an evening. The idea is to attract the impulse buyer and to learn what it means to be an impulse buyer, and for us to carry this music to an impulse buyer. Then we do a 2-hour event. It starts with an hour of cocktails. It is Miami Beach. And then 1 hour of music, narration before the music's played, with a video tightly set to that narration. And the idea is that you inform an audience so that you can transform them. We've done this now for 3 years. It's a much more powerful statement in our new space because of the technology that we have. The third is what we call Journey. We have the entire orchestra on stage, and then small ensembles and soloists on 4 alternate platforms that are raised but are still quite available to the audience. And then the fourth is called Pulse. It starts at 10 o'clock at night. It's a combination, it's an integration of DJ mix and dancing with straight-ahead concert presentation. We go 15 or 20 minutes on each. We go back and forth over the course of the evening. The seats in the theater pull back. We serve drinks. It is very much like a club, although it is every 15 or 20 minutes. Bartók Concerto for Orchestra, Ligeti, whatever we choose for that evening. In other words, straight ahead concert music, but integrated with the DJ mix. So the wall cast, which is for free, and these 4 new performance formats are the way we're going at it now, to reimagine for ourselves. But what we hope is that we will find partners, maybe some of you in this room, who will work with us and take these particular formats and apply them, or bring ideas to us and let us test those ideas.
Limor, as I mentioned, the other thing I should mention about Limor's background, just to put in a plug for my day job, is that she's an alumnus as a pianist with both bachelor's and master's degree in piano performance from the Juilliard School. So she's grown out of a very substantial classical music background to a more exploratory and adventurous area of music and performance. But I'd be curious if we could focus for a moment about your radio experience and what you think some parallels and possible dangers are between radio and orchestral life.
Right, thank you for inviting me, Ara. And I spent about 5 years in radio doing music, first on WNYC and then on WQXR, and I learned a lot about programming classical music. And I guess we were, it was funny how we went from programming music on WNYC, which is the news and talk and music station at in New York, that had a sort of a history of new music. It has John Schaefer, who has a new music show, who some of you may know, to acquiring and launching WQXR, which is has a 75-year history of being the classical music station in New York. I guess one thing that I learned that might be relevant is that there are many, but two prevalent ways of experiencing the world through music is sort of, you have your environmental listening, which is a lot of what classical radio provides. It's a service, people listen. That's what I think Alex Ross referred to that as the sit back kind of listening. And then you have your more engaged listening, which he called, I guess, leaning in, or more interactive kind of listening to the radio. And those two modes, I think, play out in the concert hall a lot. You have your, and sometimes there's confusion about who are we trying to reach and what are we trying to provide as a concert series. Are we reaching sort of are we providing the service for people who are looking for the classical music that they already know? I mean, we had a lot of euphemisms for it, so we would say, we serve both the familiarity and curiosity. There's a lot of ways to talk about two modes of experience, one that's very familiar and one that's that requires a little bit more from the audience, and not necessarily in just in the way of listening to new music, contemporary music, 20th century music, but just being open to other ways of presenting, or a concert that doesn't look like a concert, or and I learned a lot about that. One thing I did learn is that classical radio may not be your friend. Actually, it's the orchestra world's friend. The internet is your friend. Classical radio does not necessarily produce ticket sales, produce engagement, does not necessarily produce those things, development of the audience. It doesn't necessarily lead to those goals that the orchestra world and all presenters of music presenters need, which is a following, a dedication, a willingness to go out on a limb based on a trusted curator. The internet is more where people will go to learn more, to experiment, to get more depth, to re-listen to something, to do all those things. So that was a really interesting lesson that I learned in my radio world, amongst a couple more.
Throw out the couple more.
Radio. I guess the question of place was another one. I had a boss who, when I was still working for WNYC, who was in charge of all programming, but he came up through the news department. So he was a news junkie, and news and talk and analysis and BBC and all that. And he used to say to me, every city has a classical music station, and it's the most local thing they do, because they may be importing, news shows and culture shows from APM, our hosts here, or the BBC or NPR, but their music shows are made locally. They have a host with a stack of CDs, spinning CDs, and so it's the most local thing they do, and yet it's the most disembodied thing that they do. You don't have any sense of place. And now, and that was Vivaldi, and now we will hear, the 8th Symphony of Dvorak. And you can be in any city at any time of day or night. You just have no sense of place. And one of the things that we were very focused on when we kind of launched QXR was to make it all about the place, New York City, Brooklyn, whatever it was that we were doing. And we went on the assumption that the more local we are, the more actually nationally and internationally relevant we'll become. And that's going to speak more to what you're going to hopefully talk about. But, you know, the sense of place is very much, I think, missing from this world. And, you know, and came up for me a little bit in the series that happened at Carnegie Hall recently that had the Spring for Music, which had a very strong sense of place. Or, you know, it had other things, but certain concerts were really about the place from which they came. And to me, that was a huge turn. And the last thing I want to say is that looking at this group and looking at the sign on the door, and it said, I think, explore the outer reaches. Let me tell you, we're the new middle. We're not the outer reaches. This group here. Right. So, you know, and I also want to blast through this wall and combine this session with the case for relevance, because I think we're talking about the same thing from different angles.
By the way, this distinction, and I'd forgotten Alex Ross's distinction about leaning in and sitting back, is a really critical junction as we talk today. And as an aside, it reminds me of one of the most wickedly funny lines in all of music, which I can't resist telling you. Debussy, on the subject of Delius, referred to it as music to soothe well-to-do convalescents. And I'm sorry, there is an aspect of our orchestral life. I won't have to keep drawing the parallel, we'll keep going. Limor said sense of place, and it is a great transition to a new initiative that the Atlanta Symphony is doing. So Stanley, why don't you talk to us about that?
The Atlanta Symphony Orchestra is partnering with Emory University and with the Georgia Humanities Council to launch a 15-week consideration of the meaning of the creation of the world. Our intent is to look at creation from artistic, scientific, theological, and humanistic perspectives, and to do that both singly and to do that simultaneously. And we hope that by doing so, we can engage Atlanta's arts community, the education community, academic community at large, and the general public as well in a meaningful and sustained conversation over a fairly considerable amount of time. The origin of the project was clearly musical. Our music director, Robert Spano, and I were beginning to talk about meaningful ways in which we could celebrate the Atlanta Symphony Orchestra's 70th anniversary season, which is coming up in a few years. And early on in our conversations, we began to explore the idea of having a member of our Atlanta School of Composers craft a new setting of the creation text, a setting for the 21st century that would involve visual and theatrical as well as musical elements. While we thought it would be a great idea to premiere a new composition in celebration of our anniversary, we wanted to push beyond that and to do something that would serve a larger strategic goal of engaging the community in which we live in both a deeper and a broader way. Those of you who know Robert probably know that Robert Spano is at heart a teacher. He's an educator. He's a mentor. Robert holds, in addition to his various musical posts, a visiting professorship at Emory University that takes him to the Emory University campus for 3 weeks each spring. And during that 3-week time, he engages students and faculty in a variety of subjects. He lectures, he teaches, he plays, and he talks not only about music, but he talks about the sort of entire human experience. And so we thought, well, this is an interesting idea to play off of. It's probably worth mentioning that the professorship that Robert holds has had 2 previous holders, His Holiness the Dalai Lama and the author Salman Rushdie. So this is not just, he's an adjunct in the music department. This is a substantial position at Emory. So I took the idea about an emphasis on creation to our colleagues at Emory University, and through a series of really interesting and exciting conversations, we agreed to craft a 15-week long, that is a college semester long, emphasis on creation that has as its bedrock semester-long courses that look at creation, for instance, from a scientific perspective. Emory has a new chemical evolution center that looks really at the chemical origins of life. And I'm proud to say, because it's Emory, they included in the Chemical Evolution Center an artist in residence as a part of the very foundation of the organization. So they're going to do a semester-long course on the scientific origins of creation. The Candler School of Theology at Emory will be offering theological courses on religious aspects of creation. The departments of sociology, anthropology will be looking at creation myths, creation stories. What are those archetypical creation stories, and when do we tell those stories to each other? When do we tell those to our children? When are those important moments in our society when we talk about creation? The Carlos Museum of Art at Emory will stage semester-long exhibits on works that depict creation. Our colleagues at the High Museum of Art at the Woodruff Art Center will be commissioning young artists to create new representations of creation stories, creation myths, whatever your language should be, to represent what creation might mean for us in the 21st century. The Georgia Humanities Council is going to take what's happening on the Emory campus and translate it into usable material for high school social studies and art and history classrooms. And the council will work both with us and with Emory University to create a series of public forums. Some will be held face-to-face, conversations between people. Some will happen online. It will happen over the internet, but will give us the possibility of engaging a much wider audience in saying, well, let's look at creation from scientific, theological, and artistic perspectives all at the same time. What would that mean for us, and how can looking at creation from a variety of perspectives deepen our understanding? The premiere of the new composition is to occur in the 8th week of the semester, literally at the midpoint, so that we can have about 7 weeks of activities and programs and events and emphases that lead up to and prepare for the performance, and then about 7 weeks of activities and emphases and public programs that lead away from it, so that it's not just we're performing a new work and isn't that wonderful, but that there is some wider context and wider conversation that takes place around the entire thing. To support the project, we have tendered grant applications to the National Endowment for the Humanities. We'll be doing it for the National Endowment for the Arts and to a number of national foundations. The early response to the idea has been quite welcoming. People like the idea that a major American orchestra, a top 10 research university, and a public nonprofit are working together to engage a community in a meaningful dialogue about something as important as creation. We think that an emphasis on creation, at a very minimum, causes us to think about who we, the created, are, and what our responsibility is for the created world in which we live. And we think that by looking at that idea from a number of perspectives, we can do something that's really worthwhile artistically, musically, but something that really engages the community in which we live in a broader and deeper way.
Thank you. Demarre, not to play on creation puns, but would you describe the genesis, get it, the genesis of your series, Art of Élan, and also actually the why of it? What was the driving impulse? What was the internal need to create the series?
Right. Well, Art of Élan, Élan meaning or representing spirit, vigor, vitality, this energy that I felt was at times lacking in my profession as a classical flutist. So I, along with the co-founder and co-artistic director, a colleague of mine, Kate Hatmaker, came up with the idea of creating a nonprofit chamber music organization that focused on the art of Élan. The Art of Élan presents two series. The main series is a 5-concert series at the San Diego Museum of Art in one of the galleries that seeks to create a concert environment where traditional and non-traditional concert goers will feel at ease and feel curious. A lot of the time, our audience will not know exactly what they're going to hear in a program. There'll be a blurb that will explain the theme. All of our concerts at the museum are art-inspired. So they'll have a rough idea of the arc of the program, but the specific pieces aren't that important to them. This was our intent from the start. We wanted to, first of all, create an organization with a name that was pretty, but slightly vague, because the demographic that we were after would react a certain way to, you know, Demarre McGill's classical music program.
The San Diego Chamber Music Society.
Exactly, and we wanted to eliminate that. Art of Élan. Wow, that's pretty. That's nice. So, over 4 years, I think we've accomplished that goal. Our final concert of this season had a line outside of the door. People paid to get in, even though they couldn't see into the gallery, but just to listen, for music that they didn't know even once they found out what we were playing. Nobody knew any of the pieces we had programmed, and they loved it. And so we've become even more obsessed with this idea of perception and how to change the perception of what classical music is through marketing and just through our own personal engagement with the audience member, which there is a lot of, from start escorting. I mean, I escort 75% of the audience to their seats. I get to know everybody. I mean, between me and my partner, we get to know everyone. We invite the audience out for happy hour afterwards. And we have seen, slowly but surely, a very small but mighty impact on the big organization in town, which is the San Diego Symphony. I told this story at a previous panel I was on. A very important, wonderful board member of Art of Élan is a successful architect in town. And he invited me over to his place just to look at it, because he thought, you know, wouldn't it be wonderful if I had classical music in my home? He lived in a really nice downtown condo. And I walked in, I said, yeah, let's do it. You can invite your friends, you know, maybe we can raise some money, but more importantly, we can raise awareness. And the day of the show, I walked in and it just blew my mind. I said, this is a gold mine. These are all, you know, middle-aged or younger people with money who collect art, love art, but for whatever reason, haven't looked the way of the symphony, haven't felt invited to the symphony hall. And we immediately embraced and invited them to our shows, went out for drinks after our shows plural, and befriended them sincerely. They now come to the symphony, and I know for a fact that they are the future donors to the San Diego Symphony, you know. And that's very exciting to me, that my little nonprofit can actually have a small but mighty, eventually, impact on the bigger organization. Another series that Art of Élan presents is a series at a renovated warehouse space called the Glass House, which serves as an artist collective. These concerts are not art-inspired, but there is art being created around the performance space. So you're able to just wander around. We have drinks there, we have food there. The music is, not only is it unknown, but a lot of it is it's slightly more avant-garde. But we had a test run, and once again, it was sold out. I couldn't believe how many people would come to something that we said, you should come to this because you're going to like it, without giving them too many specifics, because we did not want them to react. And they came and they enjoyed. So we're starting the official series at this venue next season. I think there's three reasons why Art of Élan has been successful in San Diego. The first, I believe, is the amount of time we spend talking to people. We are, before the concert, after the concert, in between concerts, we are out in the community, shaking everyone's hands, just being the face of the organization. And I've come to realize that this is probably one of the reasons why people came initially, is because I was so convincing. I believe the people came back, even though we do a lot of new music. We're not a new music organization. I like to program what I like and what I enjoy. But I do believe that people return because of my style of programming, which I would call just simply feeling-based programming. There's absolutely nothing cookie cutter about it. I have a sense of how I believe you will react to this particular piece of music after this particular piece of music. I'm wrong sometimes. Most of the times I'm not. I trust my sense. And I really take a lot of care. We listen to the programs over and over again, trying to see how are we reacting to this. We're not just programming a new piece just to program a new piece. We're programming this work because this is fantastic. And just wait until you hear this work that follows it. So there is a definite arc to our programs that makes sense.
Demarre, can you, when we spoke in preparation, you gave an example of a program just to give a feel for what a program is like. Can you describe one?
Sure. I'm wrapping up the programming for next season. The series will be called Steppin' Out. I was debating between Stepping Out or the black version, Steppin' Out. I decided to go with Steppin' Out because it just sounded cooler. Really. The goal for Steppin' Out is to step out of our concert space into the community and find the stars that are there that our audience is not familiar with, regardless of genre, from blues to folk to there's a huge African, specifically Ethiopian population, just finding these, like a traditional Ethiopian artist, finding these people and bringing them into the museum gallery or the renovated warehouse space, and creating a classical program around them. So right now, I have a wonderful folk band that I fell in love with. I bought their CD and I said, this is good stuff. They're local and they're creating wonderful music. So Edgar Meyer's written some wonderful compositions that will work well with this program. I'm looking at even Baroque pieces that are folk-inspired, but that really make sense. They have to be strong to stand up against something it's folk, but it's slightly poppy, that's catchy. So the classical music that I program has to hold its own.
And you, if I remember correctly, you do it all as a kind of straight sequence of an hour.
Our concerts are 1 hour long, happy hour after that.
And in one stretch without...
In one stretch, right.
Yeah.
There's no talking. It's a playlist. I want to hear it like I hear it at home. And just one other thing, please, is that we put all of our programs online via the Instant Encore website the day after the show. So all of our shows over the past 4 seasons are online for everyone to listen to for free. So we found that that's a way for us to not only connect and to hook the people that enjoyed the show they just heard, but to also gain exposure across the world, because anyone can listen to our shows.
And what I'm about to say is my words, not Demarre's words, but in asking him about the relationship of this series, which involved some San Diego Symphony musicians, but not necessarily exclusively, right?
Right.
The relationship of the series to the orchestra. When it began, the orchestra was sort of benign disinterest or slightly...
Well, you know, we got a pat in the head. It's fine. It was neutral. They weren't disrespectful. Right. They didn't really have any interest. This is one of the reasons why we decided to create it. We had marketing ideas in particular. I mean, as musicians, we said, well, this seems to make sense to us. And, you know, they didn't really take us seriously.
And what has happened with the success of the series over the past 4 years, and as an audience has developed, as Demarre explained, and also even developed individual relationships with the musicians they hear in this series, it's begun to feed the symphony, as Demarre suggested, and it's become a very great interest to the symphony. So there's a critical piece of information in that as well. Jesse, before we go back to more specifics, let me pull back. I know this panel was something you very much wanted to see happen in a conversation you wanted to stimulate. Why is this topic critical at this particular juncture and in the context of this conference?
Well, you know, I think it raises three questions about orchestras for me. You know, one is, what does creativity mean for orchestras? Who is responsible for it? And what do we ask of our creative people? And I think these are relative questions, very important questions to be asking now, because not so long ago we had the answers to those questions and they were very clear. And I remember Ara and I worked very closely together for a number of years on a conductors institute, the National Conducting Institute with the National Symphony. And we were training young conductors in how to be musical leaders. And we began with getting them to explore what their musical passions were and to get in touch with that and to have that kind of be the wellspring of where their direction led them. And we went from that to, so given those passions, what does a great program look like for you? And then to extend it even further, what's a great season? And for a long time, creativity for American orchestras could be defined largely that way, making wonderful programs, executing them at a really high level, and assembling them in some kind of coherent way over the course of a season that gave the public some sense of a journey of where you were going. They had great authenticity because it came from the heart of a conductor. And I think to a large extent, this is still a terribly important part of the creative life of orchestras, arguably still the core. And you think of the concert we heard last night and any concert we go to that is played wonderfully the way it was last night, we're seeing creativity in action before our eyes. But meanwhile, a lot of other stuff's been happening around the world, in our communities, in other creative parts of the arts. And so there are new expectations and there are new possibilities. And so whether it's a question of the public's tremendous appetite and interest in lots of genres, their interest in how does place and community influence and become a part of what a performing arts organization is about, whether it's about what kinds of creative collaborations get made between your organization and other performing artists or even museums in your community, or even, I forget the term that came up in this session I was in earlier today about people in their early 50s get to this place where they're like really curious and they want to learn a lot of stuff. And so, you know, where are orchestras in the intellectual life of their communities and of the country for that matter? And so, you know, Stanley has spoken to this very directly. And then, you know, Demarre's point, again, you know, another dimension of how creativity is emerging and changing is what young musicians are bringing into our world. And with the almost total collapse of all the gatekeepers from having careers, with no longer needing a record company, no longer needing a publicist, no longer needing anyone to help you market. I mean, you do all this stuff yourself. And so musicians are taking advantage of all of those things and defining all kinds of new ways of creating experiences around classical music. And so, to go back to the three questions, what does creativity mean for an orchestra? Who's responsible for it? And what do you need to have to be able to execute it well? From our vantage point at the League, and we don't put on concerts, but we think a lot about what are the systemic questions that orchestras need to ask themselves. So the search for a music director now is really, you have to entertain a different set of questions. And I used to believe very strongly that music directors ought to be able to do everything. And in fact, I ran a lot of programs that helped them to get better at doing a lot of things besides conducting. And I've come around 180 degrees. And the most important thing a conductor can do is to conduct and make great concerts. Some of them have other gifts, and that is a wonderful thing when that happens. But it doesn't always happen, and you can't force it on conductors. And so it raises a question, if we now have this much wider creative palette to work with, and audiences that are looking for different types of experiences and ways of participating in classical music, and your conductor is not the person who can figure all that out. And after all, why should they? I mean, that's hard stuff. I think about the Chicago Symphony's Beyond the Score program, which had no conductor involved in creating it. And this was one of, tremendous, really a breakthrough in how orchestras express their creativity and make themselves more deeply embedded in the intellectual life of their audiences. And in order to do it, they put on their staff a full-time musicologist who's there year in and year out to figure out how to do these things. And so, it speaks to acknowledging the demand for a larger skill set, which incidentally, the museum community figured out 20 years ago. And in the museum community, the curators were at the top of the heap. The people who decided what art got hung on the wall and next to what other pictures it got next to. And that was the most important thing that mattered. In the same way for us, what mattered most was our programs and how perfectly they were designed. And the museums figured out they needed another kind of talent, which was to help the public engage with that art and have a meaningful experience with it. And so you go to a museum now and you see all kinds of ways of helping I guess they call them viewers, the people who go to the museum, to help them engage with it, understand it, think about it, reflect on it, have new dimensions to it. And so the museum community they created new roles for people whose specific job was just to do that. And we've begun to see a little bit of that in orchestras. Tom Cabanis at the Philadelphia Orchestra had that role for some time. He was in charge of every public outing of that organization, whether it was a staff member speaking or Christoph Eschenbach walking out on stage and helping him with what he was going to say. And I think with our desire to focus more intensively on our audience's current and prospective, that we also need to have the creative energies to be able to do that. And to some extent, those are new skills. And one place those new skills are, I think, right in front of our noses, are in people like Demarre and the work that he's doing. New York City is bursting with young musicians creating extraordinarily exciting, thrilling groups playing classical music. And, like Demarre's point, which is like Larry Wendling's thing about addressing the unarticulated desires of your audience. One of the things that these New York groups have in common, I think, is a sense of intimacy and closeness, and they are capturing audience, and they're capturing a lot of money. The International Contemporary Ensemble, with a budget of, I think, about $600,000 or $700,000, was awarded a $340,000 grant from the Mellon Foundation. there is a great sense that these new up-and-coming young artists are where the action is. And so, you know, the question that Ara asked Demarre is a fascinating one, which is, you know, where do orchestras converge? Do they converge? Is there a place where these young artists fit together with our orchestras, or are they parallel, or do we want to work like crazy to get them into our orchestras so that their energies and their creativity can help grow what the creative experience is for our orchestras today?
There are lots of rich themes to explore and that have been raised, so I want to throw out a handful of questions for the room for us to discuss together. Let's begin with this distinction that Limor made very helpfully from her radio experience about engaged versus environmental listening, or the even more vivid Alex Ross term, the leaning forward listening as opposed to the sitting back listening. It strikes me, having heard that distinction, that what Howard is describing, what Stanley is describing, and what Demarre is describing are all leaning forward kinds of listening experiences. And I wanted to throw out to the room the paradox and the reality that some audiences, and sometimes long-standing audiences, are coming for the re-experiencing of the familiar and the leaning back experience, what the late Michael Steinberg wonderfully likened in a great essay on Beethoven to the experience of listening to a Beethoven symphony as if it's a familiar commute. You sort of sit back and you check off the marker spots. There's the oboe solo, right? There's the big return. Okay, we're home free. Let's go home, darling. That kind of re-experiencing of the familiar. It is the reality of part of the audience, and I want to pose that question. How does one play with the tension between an audience that's looking for a more active level of engagement and an audience that's looking for the environmental and sitting back experience?